Welcome, Julie.
Hey, hello, how are you?
Yeah,
Hey,
awesome.
Julie.
Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
All right, so then let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Art. I'm part of the Foster Writing community. Some of you might have crossed paths with me already, but most importantly, we're joined by Julie today, who's also a participant of the Foster Writing community. She has been in publishing even before Amazon.com was around. And so she brings a bunch of experience, which we'll talk and dive into a little bit later today. But one of the topics I would love to start with, and it's like part of the research. So I saw that you were a state champion in swimming.
Really? Where did you find that?
I have my sources.
Oh my
I
goodness.
think I saw it in a Slack community somewhere. And my question would be, what was the journey from being a top level athlete to publishing in the world of the written word?
Oh wow. Okay. So being a state champion swimmer got me to Columbia University, which was amazing. Where I studied architecture, but because I was an athlete and trying to do studio classes, I completely burnt myself out. Got sick even. So I switched to writing. So that kind of made like the leap. And I ended up, my first job in publishing came as a result of taking a course in the suburbs. It was like, and I ended up at Progressive Architecture magazine, which was a professional magazine at the time. And I was still thinking of going back to architecture school after I recovered from all that swimming. And but I found out really quickly that I loved the publishing, because what that allowed me to do was to meet so many really interesting people. And by working at the magazine, I was already sort of in the same room with Peter Eisenman and some of these like amazing top architects. And I just thought that was fascinating. And architecture magazines led me into architecture books. I actually ended up getting most of a master's degree in architectural criticism, which was taught at Parsons School of Design, where I learned how, and that's actually one of the places where I learned a lot about book publishing, because my professors were publishers. And a couple of them, our writing professor was a copy editor for a major, I think she was for Little Brown. She was a copy editor there. And she taught us a lot about how a book is structured, how to create an outline. And even though our subject was very particular about architecture, I learned a lot about doing books. And then I didn't finish that master's degree because I got pregnant with twins. And that was the end of that. And it was really great to switch from magazine publishing to book publishing when you're a mother, because the pace is a lot slower. So I don't know if that answered the question exactly, but that's how my career path started. And I ended up being a specialist in architecture books. I worked for John Wiley and Sons and Reader's Digest, doing those big, huge tomes. And then ultimately that led me to Sterling Publishing, which was part of Barnes and Noble, where I did much more general trade books. You know, I did everything. I did wine and fitness in addition to home repair. So it seemed like every job I got made me more and more of a generalist. And until I got sick of that, and then I quit and started my own publishing company, which was not a brilliant idea. It was, you know, inspired, but not brilliant. Because I started, because I was a busy mom, I decided I will make books for busy moms. I commissioned a book on soccer, which was something I didn't understand, because that's how I learned things, is like actually not by reading them books, but commissioning them. And I sold this book to Borders. I had national distribution really quickly because I had connections. And you know what happened to Borders in 2009?
Super interesting.
They went under. And so did, you know, and that was the end of my publishing company. And then from there, I continued to work with authors who were doing self-publishing work. And a friend of mine, it was actually, I don't know what the connection with Seth Godin was. Oh yes, my connection with Seth Godin is that his wife was my attorney when I worked at Wiley, and she worked on all the publishing contracts with me. And so I was like, where am I now? Oh yeah, yeah. So the people who used to work at this packaging company remembered me. And when there was an opening for a digital rights director, that is somebody to run the self-publishing arm of the literary agency, the Writers House, she gave me a call. And so I ended up working in a literary agency too. And that was really a lot of fun. Again, I got to work with amazing authors. This was Stephanie Meyer's publishing company, Nora Roberts, Glenn Greenwald, like, you know, all kinds of really amazing authors. So that gave me another view into the publishing world. So I worked sort of on the professional, technical, how-to side. Then I did my own thing, and then I worked for the literary agency. Now I'm back to doing my own thing, because I feel like the industry is changing so quickly that nowhere could I go work and really be a change maker. So I feel I can have more influence helping writers change the publishing world than being inside at this point.
That's probably the most comprehensive 5-minute introduction I've ever heard in my life. Good job. So many things to dive deeper in here. One thing to me, so I don't know that much about publishing. I understand the world of online writing a little bit, but what would be your high level definition of what publishing includes, and specifically what it doesn't include?
Sure. You know, like at the very highest level, you can break down the root of the word publish, and it literally, it means to make public. So, you know, just like in Ship 30 for 30, it's shipping your work, it's making it public. And I think a distinction that I make often when I talk to people who are beginning to write is that you can write and not publish, but you can't publish and not have something written. Right? So sense. It's like two sides of the coin, and publishing is a business, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's for money. I mean, you can publish and you don't have to exchange that as a good for service. You could be publishing just to get an idea out there, but it is also a business.
Got it. And so if we want to break down the different types of players or roles within publishing,
yeah, so I loved your title, the 80-20 of indie publishing, because there are two really great statistics around that 80-20 rule right now. And that is, in the current moment, at least as of a year or two ago, 80% of the books published right now are published, self-published. That is in quantity, in number of titles. And it breaks down, nobody really knows what the statistics for Amazon are, but it breaks down to something like 1,000 books a day are being published, and of those 80% are self-published. On the other hand, within the industry, in terms of profit, 80% of the revenue in the industry is being driven by traditional publishers. So even though you have really two ends of the spectrum, it's like a seesaw. You have this like, right now we have the consolidation of the big publishers. We have just in the United States, we have just 5 major publishers, soon to be 4, or is it 6, soon to be 5. Anyway, there aren't that many, and it's consolidated into very few hands. But on the other hand, it's fracturing into, you know, millions of individual publishers at the same time. And so what we're seeing is, on one hand, there's way too much gatekeeping. Like, it's really hard to get a publishing deal unless you know somebody, or like we can talk about how to do that in a little bit, because I have some tricks, but there's too much gatekeeping on one hand, in my opinion. And on the other hand, with this self-publishing movement, there is too little gatekeeping. Like, anybody can publish. You know, there was a piece of what was it? There was an article written by a self-publishing author a couple months ago about how he published a picture of his foot and made it a bestseller on Amazon. Like, it's really easy to publish crap and call it a bestseller and to make it work on Amazon. So you have this, what I think is the thing that people are not talking about right now, but what is emerging is this really strong culture of independent publishers. And that's what gets me the most excited about the industry. And I don't know if you follow Jane Friedman. She has an amazing newsletter for working writers, but she talks a lot about this idea that if you look very carefully at the statistics coming in year over year, smaller publishers, independent publishers are capturing more of the market. And that's really exciting. So
what would be examples of these smaller independent publishers?
I was just trying to think of what the name.
Something like Holloway or O'Reilly?
Yeah, any of these, like I think of, I don't know, Microcosm. This is just one of their books that they published. Microcosm is a publisher out of, I believe, Portland or Seattle, Pacific Northwest, and they started publishing lesbian bicycling books. Very niche audience, yeah. And last year they grew to over, they've grown from like a few titles to over $1 million of revenue a year. Every one of their authors, is guaranteed to sell 5,000 books. They're really, really smart about knowing their audience and publishing into that. And that's what I think is really interesting. And there are different models for publishing, but I think this like really knowing and owning your audience is great. My first experience in publishing at the Taunton Press, where I was the book editor of Fine Home Building magazine, right? I had this architecture background. I was really excited about construction and design and kind of a geek about it. And we published a magazine around that and had an audience who gave us feedback every month. They're like, these are the articles we love. And we built our book publishing program around consumer, demand and where the interest was. And that was a phenomenally, weirdly successful model of publishing that is not generally applied across the board in large publishing. Large publishing is kind of the lottery model. We'll throw it at the wall and see what sticks.
So from a higher perspective, if you think about like the past 25 years in publishing, so you mentioned one trend being some sort of consolidation of large publishing houses, and they control a lot of the revenue. At the same time, you have small indie publishers, which come out with very niche specific contents and books. Is there anything else that you've seen maybe over the past 5 years or that you see happening in the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, I was saying so this independent publishers, right? If you have on the one hand, you have self-publishing, these are authors who are publishing themselves. In the middle, there's independent publishers, ones like, Microcosm, but also like Soho Press and sort of like, I'm just like blanking on all their names. There's so many wonderful presses, but there's a continuum of models. So there are small presses that run very close to traditional model, whereas they pay royalties and they take all the expenses. Then there are small presses that run on a hybrid model, which is the place where authors are sort of footing the bill for things like editing and book design and production, these expenses ahead of time, but they're supported by the publisher who does that. And then sort of on the, I almost call this the lower end, closer to self-publishing, you have publishing services. I think of like BookBaby, right? Where it's fully pay to play, where the authors pay money, but you do get a more professional product. So, it's kind of like a spectrum of the publisher does everything to the author does more to, the author pays for everything. And then something that's not a company, but is definitely a trend are author cooperatives. I see this in because one of the hardest things to do is marketing, particularly if you are a fiction writer. If you're nonfiction, you can use the same kind of marketing that you market any product with. You're solving a problem, most likely. But if you're a fiction writer, you're writing to entertain. And so you need to find a pool of readers who would read the same kind of books. So there are writing co-ops like the Tall Poppy Writers, and the Tall Poppies are a collaboration of about 30 some odd women who write women's fiction, and they all write women's fiction, which is not like romance. It doesn't necessarily have a romantic, but it has an emotional arc. So they all kind of have the same appeal to the same audience, and together they they collaborate by paying a social media manager, but then they all promote each other's books and provide that kind of support. And I kind of see Foster doing something similar, but this is it's more on the marketing end, whereas Foster is is doing the editorial support and the development support, which is really important.
It's very interesting that you pointed out, because I think a couple of weeks ago we had Nathan Bichetz from Every Bundle on this podcast, and they're doing something similar around business and nonfiction writing. So it's more of like paid newsletter bundles, but so pretty much it's aggregation of demand, which makes a lot of sense. So one of the questions that I saw in the chat from Rajat, he asked if we can talk about contractual terms, so kind of royalty versus advance, like hard numbers, and maybe we can use your idea of writing a fiction book and how you would go from your idea outline to actually then interacting with publishers and getting it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. My favorite way to talk about this is as an acquisitions editor, I was the one who was buying these authors and making these contracts. So I would take it from that perspective.
Sure, any way it works for you.
Yeah. So I recommend you reverse engineer your deal. And the first thing I would be doing is, if I were writing fiction, so say I'm writing speculative fiction, right? I would go out and identify 10 to maybe 20 writers who are already where I want to be. So who's published in the way I want to be published? And if anyone wants to send me an email, I'm Julie at Julie Inc. I can send you a tracker for this, where you can like keep track of all these competitive authors. Find out who their publisher is. And then you can find out who their agent is. Either that's going to be in the acknowledgments. You can use a source like Publishers Marketplace is golden. If you know that site, it's a paid subscription. It's $25 a month. If you're querying, it's totally worth it. You don't have to subscribe to it all the time, but during the time you're querying, when you're doing the research. So I would know everything I can about these authors, and get their newsletters, follow them on social, because they're going to drop all kinds of clues as to their publishing deals, their cover reveals, who they're working with, where they're showing up, so that's what I would do. I'd start with the publishers. Then I would try to figure out which agents are selling to this publisher. So when you start looking at literary agents, like when I was at Writers House, there were 22 agents in there. And I can tell you that not any two were alike. Every one of them had a very particular taste and sensibility. Some were just passionate about children's picture books. Other ones of them were way into romance, business, conspiracy theory, mystery. Like every agent is a specialist, or at least the really good ones are specialists. So you want to, and the life of an agent is really, they're like a salesperson. So they spend all their time developing relationships with a small group of editors and publishers to whom they can sell their books. So those agents are, they go out, maybe post-COVID, they're back to going out to lunch, they're networking, they're really knowing, they're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what the publishers want. And then they're going to try to find the best matching authors to the sensibility they have with the editors they sell to. So that's how I would go about, finding your deal. And then when you're ready to submit and you're sending a query letter to first the agents and then the editors, you be really specific. Like, you represent Margaret Atwood, and I think you would like my work because it's like her, but it's updated. It's like in the future. Or you want to put yourself in context to recognize, to show people that you've done their research before you go to these agents, because what I could see on the agency side is that 99% of authors just they shut their eyes and sent their novels in. It's as if they didn't even pay attention to who they were sending it to. It's good advice to query widely, to send your material to a lot of agents, but only send it to agents that make sense and that have a demonstrated track record publishing very similar books to yours.
And then when you've decided to go with your short list of agents, do you have any benchmarks of what realistic, let's say, deal structures would be for a first-time writer versus an established writer, and what the thresholds are after which you would realize that you're getting screwed
You'll
over?
never make any money back. But here, it's, you know, one thing is like agents absolutely hate us writers having this conversation. It's just like they don't want it to be happening. And the main reason they don't want us talking about this is that it really varies on the book and the author and the market and the potential. So as an acquisitions editor, what I would try to do is figure out, by looking at similar books, how many potentially copies of books I could sell in 1 year and then over 3 years. And what I would try to do is I would offer that author a royalty based on what I assumed my best guess is that they could earn in that first year. And typically, deals really vary. And there's royalties. Net royalties are more common, and net royalties are the money that you receive after, that you actually get in the door. So like a net royalty would be if I sold a book to Barnes and Noble and it was a 50% discount, right? And the book was $20. And so the publisher got $10. And of that $10, I'm going to get 10%. So I get $1 a book on a $20 book. Sort of, the golden royalty would be if you get what they call list royalties. List royalties are on the actual price of the book. So then if I sold, and they do that on hardcovers, and usually you have to be an experienced or a really hotshot author to get a list royalty, but that guarantees you 10% of, if it's 10% of that $20, you get $2 a book. And no matter what discount the publisher sells it to the bookseller, you're going to get the same amount no matter what. So those are the two really basic ones. And so I actually, again, you can write me, I can send you like, I think I have on my website somewhere, a free downloadable like Excel spreadsheet where you can put these numbers in and figure it out. It is usually at the end of the day, it's like a 50-50 deal. So even if you're getting a 15% net royalty, if I, as the publisher, am going to factor in the what I have to pay my editor, what I have to pay my designer, how much I have to pay to print the books, and then at the end of that day, I was going to split whatever's left with the author, it usually comes out to be about 15% net. So when people talk about 50-50 profit sharing deals, which is pretty common now for an ebook royalty, it's not very different number-wise than a 15% net deal. And I don't know if that is this clear, because this is kind of a sticky conversation.
It is, but it also helps to have the free resource, the download.
Yeah, well, definitely. And my little calculator tells you if you're better off self-publishing, getting a royalty, or getting a 50-50 deal. So
awesome. You
can figure that out. So 60% of books in traditional publishing never earn back that royalty, that advance, 60%. So only about 40% do. And there is a myth in publishing that if you don't earn out, you've screwed up. And I would like to flip that on its head and say that if you don't earn out, you have an awesome agent, because your agent got you a big paycheck from the beginning that more than covered, that made you larger than the percentage than you were promised. And publishers try to hang this like on this author, you did not sell out and you didn't make your royalty, so we're not going to sign you to another deal. Okay, that is bullshit. And they know that the publisher has a lot, if you are going with a traditional publisher, they have 90% more responsibility and efficiency to be able to sell their book than you do. If you can create a 10% bump in sales by tweeting about your book, amazing. But they can get into Barnes and Noble, they can get into wholesalers, they can get you into Entertainment Weekly. You can't do that on your own. And for them to put that down on an author is just, to me, it's criminal, and they shouldn't be able to do it.
No, it's an amazing way of spinning kind of what success means as an author. So thanks for that. We have an audience question. There's one more question I would like to ask before we get to you, Sarah. So you mentioned there's some some amount of preparation needed if you reach out as a first-time author to an agent. And so now, beyond knowing what the short list of agents are and saying, look, you published something very similar along the lines of what I want to write, what would you say is the minimum amount of proof of work that you have to deliver in this first conversation to actually get a seat at the table?
This is so subjective and so variable by agents. I can tell you, if I had one top secret, it is befriend someone else that agent represents and have them make that introduction. So if you can kind of go through the side door instead of trying to go directly to that agent, it just cuts through so much.
Works the same way in venture capital. So
yeah, okay, yeah, it's the same. And agents are actually more available than you think. You know, you can follow them on Twitter, you can DM them, you can actually like befriend them and be known long before your book deal. So that's not a bad thing to do. The other thing that I think is underutilized is that if you go to writers' conferences or any of these sort of literature events, almost all of them have private one-on-one meetings with agents and editors. Take advantage of that, because then you have a personal connection. And then what I've also heard from agents is that they meet all these amazing, promising authors, and only a small percentage of them actually follow up and send their manuscripts, which is like mind-blowing. Like, why would you meet them and not do that? So that I would definitely do that. But the more you know about them, like you knew about my swimming, like, wow, kind of like puts me in like, wow, how did you know that you did your research, is really going to be useful.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Cool. Then I'd like to open it up for Q&A, if that's fine with you.
Sure.
I have a couple more questions, but I think the others also are curious to ask some. So Sarah, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks, Art, for hosting this conversation. Julie, it's so great to meet you and hear from you. I have like 400 questions, so I'll try and be concise. But so it's really interesting. I kind of have, I did a lot of like craft studies and, you know, went to writers conferences like Tin House and stuff like that. And I basically realized that I am too lazy to do a lot of selling myself. And so what I ended up doing, like I'm guessing a lot of people on this call, is that we're just doers and we're like, fuck it, I'll build the audience myself. Started a newsletter, you know, and just got to work where it's like the permissionless thing where it's like, I'm just going to go for it. And hopefully eventually some gatekeeper lets me in, you know, but I'm coming at the door with an audience, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it's really interesting because I think the digital media world, like I've worked with, I've seen how the entertainment world and movies and visual art has been transformed by the rise of the independent creator. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it seems like the book publishing world is sort of lagging, but kind of mimicking what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, to try and focus this into one question, because there's probably a lot of things you could do with it observation-wise, you know, what is the most, like, what's the laziest, like lowest effort way to go towards publishing a book? Because that's really my thing, is that now I'm like, okay, well, I've got 75 issues of my newsletter. I've got other aspects to publish. Like, I'm ready to get a collection together and sell it. But it's like, what I don't have is time to query 75 agents and send in my manuscript to 400 people. You know what I mean? And that was always what kept me from selling a book in the days when I was really just generating and submitting.
Could you tell me specifically what your book is? Because there's different strategies. So.
Yeah, sure. It's a nonfiction book. It's kind of, I would say it's sort of a combo of prescriptive nonfiction and memoir. So it's kind of like probably somewhere in like a you are a badass kind of realm, but not as cheesy maybe.
Well, now she's sort of said that you have to be different now than a badass. But you know, I would do the same thing. It would be just what I was saying, is look for the agents that are, you know, who published You Are a Badass, who is the editor of that, what are they looking for the next thing? You know, don't go wide, don't research 1,000 people, just like hone in right on that category and see who's publishing in it. The easiest, I feel like there's least resistance in self-publishing, which is like a little frightening, but then you'll sell 3 copies. 93% of books that are published sell less than 50 copies. So just don't do that. Wait for the agent. But it would be doing that. Like if you're a lazy author who hates to promote yourself, like the one publishing imprint that authors love, and it's weird, is Amazon's publishing company.
Oh, interesting.
Not KDP, but all their imprints like Lake Isle. Almost every author I've known has been just like over the moon happy with them because they have all these tools. Like they have the audience, they have the data, they know what books to sell, and they can get, so I would look at them, but then they don't accept unaided inquiries either. So you would just need to just do your research. Who's selling to Amazon? Who's selling to that imprint that you want to be in? And that's like a really good one. I'd also look at, small presses that are in business. Like for what you're saying, I'm thinking like 10-speed press. I'm a huge fan of source books that are sort of these like second level publishing books. And I can tell you as an acquisitions editor, the case I would need to make, and you would just need to help me make this case, isn't does this author have a platform? And again, I'm going to tell you this platform business is also bullshit because I don't know an agent out there. Well, I do know an agent out there or two who will take somebody with a giant audience. Those agents want celebrities. They want people with millions and millions of subscribers. But below that level, they want a quality book. Way more. And if 2 authors came in, one had spent all their time building a platform and the other one spent all their time really making their writing great and addressing the reader need, they're going to pick the great writing every time. And then if they want to reject you, they'll tell you it's your platform, but that's bullshit. They're rejecting you because they don't know how to sell the book. And if the writing isn't good enough, that's why they can't sell it. It's not, they use platform as just like this like blanket excuse that puts the blame down on authors when they shouldn't. They should be blaming themselves for not being able to sell books. I'm sorry. Is that helpful or is that ranty?
That's so helpful because, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It tracks, but it is such a refrain, right? Like build a platform, build a platform. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome.
Great question, Sarah. Rajat, you want to go?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Art, for hosting, and thank you, Julie, for taking the time. Genuinely appreciate it. So, we talked a little bit about the world of publishing from the author perspective. Mm-hmm. I think this question is more from a publisher perspective.
Great.
And imagine someone is trying to be an independent publisher.
Yes, please do that.
So the question I have for you is like in the spectrum of publishing, right, where on the self-publishing end, you basically have all the cost, 0 advance, 100% royalty. Right. And then on the extreme other end of like going to a big publisher, you have high advance, royalty in like less than 10%, that sort of a stake. I'm assuming an independent publisher sits somewhere in between.
Yes, but I can tell you that less than 10% is worth more than the 100%, dollar-wise.
Agreed. Yeah. Fair enough.
A really common is the 50-50 profit model. That seems to be emerging as a standard, a 30-70 or a 50-50.
For an independent publisher, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when you say 30-70, that is 30% royalty to the author plus some advance, or how is?
Well, your better independent publishers, like if you look at Microcosm's model, for example, they give every author $500. Woohoo, nothing, right? Mm-hmm. But they want you to break even within the first royalty period. So I really understand that. Having tried to be an independent publisher, you're very cash poor. So if you are an independent publisher, you have to put out all the money to pay for the production of the book and to print them and to warehouse them and to sell them. You have to do all of this 6 months before you ever realize any money from the sale of the book. So, a small independent publisher, is less likely to pay much of an advance because they just don't have the cash.
Gotcha.
But sort of you can talk about the tiers. There's like the big publishers have the big bucks, you know, that's where you're going to get 6- and 7-figure advances. And then there's the next 25 where you're going to get advances of like between 5,000 and 50,000.
Sure.
And then you get down to microcosm, and like if I were to do it, $500. And then I'm sharing the risk with you, the author. And I'm hoping you do have an audience to which you can sell a book.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for answering that.
Does that answer the question? Okay.
It does, and very helpful. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Lyle, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I love that you're just calling BS over and over. It's like so refreshing. And like a lot of it's just resonating really hard with me because it's yeah, kind of along the same lines. I've had this talk with a few people that are in the process of writing books, or even people who have written books and been published and stuff, about, you know, you hear this refrain of like, oh, if you go traditional, you're only making $1 or $2 per book or something. And it's like, how do you view like the money versus like the prestige of having written a book? Or like, you know, because I know like if you go down the more traditional path, you're more likely to be able to be on like a New York Times bestseller list or something like that. Like you said, they have access to things that I would never have access to. And that brings with it some sort of prestige, which is sort of like, how do you put a dollar amount to that? And like, it could open doors that were unexpected. At least that's my view. I'd be curious to get your take on it.
So I think you wanted to talk about prestige and yeah, percentages. So in turn, I'll break that into 2 questions. So in terms of prestige, only the top like 1% of traditionally published authors are going to get the Today Show, right? And are going to get like they're going to give the A-list authors all of that special attention. The others are not going to get that, at least not till you get to that level, or if you like have a weird surprise breakout hit. So that's not at all a given with any kind of traditional publishing deal. However, and then if you kind of look at the general public, like we're into book publishing and we're into books, into writing, and we know about publishing companies and imprints, but most readers have no idea who published the book. They have no idea. They know Stephen King. They do not know who published him. I don't even know off the top of my head who publishes Stephen King. So the publisher does not necessarily, to writers and to those of us who aspire to be writers, there is this prestige bestowed upon us by being chosen or getting through the gatekeepers. But to readers and the general public, they don't know the difference. So if a book has a really great cover and it's beautifully packaged and it's priced right, it does not matter who it came from. You could do that yourself. You know, you can now on Readsy, you can hire all these independent editors and book designers who are moonlighting because traditional publishing doesn't pay them enough to pay their rent in New York City. So, and you'll get the same, you know, quality of cover and design. So, you know, that's it. But in terms of getting the deal, as I said, like for the most part, studies have shown that if you are traditionally published, most people who are traditionally published end up making more dollar money, you know, and getting hung up on the percentages really isn't all that useful, because if a publisher can't 10x your sales of what you could do yourself, then there is no reason to go with that publisher. You really shouldn't. And in terms of when you are making a deal, when you have an agent and you're working on that, selling the book, you want an agent who calls bullshit on that, will make this in 1 year, and you want them to be really more value pricing your advance. So they're saying, you know, Jen Sincero, who did Badass, you know, got $1 million, and Sara is the next Jen Sincero, so we should give her $1 million too. You know, forget the model. You know, she got this got, you know. So that's the way I would say. You know, really go in very positive and gung ho, and don't say, oh, I'll just take the smallest advance because, you know, I really want to be with Random House. Don't do it. Don't accept that kind of deal. If it were me.
Awesome. That's great.
So yeah, one question to piggyback on Lyle's question around the importance of books for online first writers.
Mm-hmm.
So traditionally, if I think of a writer, it's someone who's toiling away for many years in a dark chamber, and then there's either a book of genius coming out or the majority of it is like never sees any shelves. But if you are starting online first as a writer who has a newsletter, maybe tweets, maybe writes blog posts,
Yeah.
do you have any kind of playbook recommendation if writers as like these should first test out their ideas, publish them online and repackage them?
Totally. Exactly. That's exactly what I do. And funny, I am creating this course, and I should have it up soon, on like how content creators can publish books. And I completely agree with that. And, you know, regardless, you know, you should have, your opus should be, you know, should be treated differently, but you can publish a Kindle book that's 2,500 words long. You know, that's 10 pages of text. It's a short story. It's a long essay. And you could start having a collection of these Kindle books. And that gives you the practice of how to, you know, how to work within the Amazon ecosphere. You'll be selling these books for $2.99. That's not going to threaten any publisher. And if it's short, they wouldn't publish a short book anyway, so it's not going to compete with anything they might want to do. But it does, it makes you a published author, and it gives you a stack of books. So I would argue that, you know, short Kindle publishing is the way to get started.
First rung of credibility. Reminds me a little bit of Andy Weir, who just released Project Hail Mary, and he has this short story called The Egg, which is for free on his own blog, but I think he also has it on Amazon Publishing or Kindle for 99 cents.
So I'm totally going to do the same thing when I do my book. So like, I really want to work on this handbook for authors, and I intend to publish it. There's this great software called Pressbooks. I don't know if anyone knows about this. This is so awesome. It is a WordPress-based book publishing platform. And you can actually literally import your blog or Word documents into it. And it will give you a web version of your book that you can put a paywall on or not, but it will also export to EPUB, Mobi, and PDF, like pre-formatted. You don't even need to hire a book designer. So I'm going to start building that handbook out on Pressbooks, and so people will be able to read it, and even because it's WordPress, they can comment on it and make comments. And then when I feel like it, I can export whatever I have and turn that into a Kindle book and put that piece of it up. And so that would be the tool that I would use and recommend. And I love Andy Weir's story is amazing. Like 2 of them, like 50 Shades of Grey, that started as fan fiction that was self-published. Andy Weir, who did The Martian, he crowdsourced that book. He started writing it, and then he asked all these scientists for their input and like, okay, how could this guy survive? Given X, could he make it to Y? You know, so he figured out this really clever scenario by really, you know, building in public that book.
Before it was called Building in Public.
Before it's called Building in Public, but now fiction writers are on Wattpad or Radish, or any of these other sort of serial platforms that, you know, it's more sort of youth oriented, but those things exist. You know, I don't know that Americans are used to reading books online and on their cell phones. I think it's more common in Asia and Europe.
Got it. Is the playbook different for fiction versus nonfiction?
Yeah, I think so. So for fiction, what you want to do is get involved in fiction communities. And so pretty much every genre has an association. So you could join the romance writers, you could join the science fiction writers, you could join the thriller and horror writers. And what you want to do is sort of participate and get to know the other authors, you know, become part of that community, so that, again, you have that person who can introduce you to their agent, but you also get to know the norms and hear all the gossip about the industry and just like be part of it. I would say don't be a writer alone in a closet. You know, if you plan to write in a genre, you know, mysteries, join the Mystery Writers Association, go to their conference, know the people, you get writers groups, you get critiques, they have contests, lots of ways to get exposure early on. If you want to write literary fiction, the best thing you can do is publish in journals. I can tell you that agents who represent literary read every one of those journals, and they are constantly looking for new talent, and then they'll call you. You know, it's not the other way around. So enter contests, win awards. That's what I would do.
That makes sense. So we have one more question from Lyle, but based on the chat, it seems like what would be super helpful is some sort of centralized resource. And maybe there is already something like that where there is a list of communities, of writer communities that people could possibly join.
You know what? I'll put it up on my blog.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'll just send you all the questions. So it's around communities, tools, business models of various publishing houses. And yeah, I guess like that would be
the outline in my book. Thank you.
It's like all the participants of this call. Yeah, Lyle.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask a specific question to me, but I think it might be applicable to Sarah too. I'm writing a memoir book, and I write memoir kind of stories on my newsletter, and that's how I'm kind of building my audience on the side while I work on the longer project. And I've heard conflicting things about memoir in particular, where people say like, oh, you need to have a completed manuscript. And then other people say, no, you should really write a book proposal and maybe have some sample chapters that are like your really the best stuff. And then someone can mold it and sell it for you. I'd just be curious to get your take, being in the industry for so long.
That is very controversial, and in fact, the subject of much argument. So as you probably know, if you're writing fiction, you have to submit an entire finished manuscript. And that's just the way it is. You write a query letter and you have to have your book done. You do not submit fiction if you're not finished. If you're writing nonfiction, you write a proposal and you have sample chapters and you send that out. And the reason they want to do that is usually that particular publisher wants to shape it the way they want to have it, right? So they want to work with you to finish your manuscript. So memoir is one of those weird genres that's kind of, it's what's happened, unfortunately, since Eat, Pray, Love. Memoir is now judged to be equivalent to fiction, right? So I guess the question is, if you are writing a memoir that is as compelling a story as a fictional, as a novel, I almost said fictional novel, I'm sorry, I wouldn't say that, but as compelling as a novel, then you want to write the whole thing and present it as if it were a novel. If, on the other hand, you are telling a story with your memoir that is a universal story that will help a lot of people, and I think that's sort of what Sarah was saying her book is, then you would want to send it as a nonfiction proposal, because you're more likely, there might be more prescriptive stuff in that book, in which case the publisher wants to get more involved in it. So it's just like, how do you write it? Now, from what I've heard anecdotally, and I don't have any statistics on this, the more efficient approach is the on proposal approach, that you're more likely to sell your memoir on proposal. And the cynical reason for that is that if an agent reads your writing and it isn't as good as the blockbuster novel they just read, then they will reject it because it doesn't meet the novel standards. Whereas a memoir can have these great hooks, these great human hooks and sales hooks, and then you don't sort of muddle it. Is that the answer you're looking for? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And that echoes kind of what I've heard. I also think it's interesting because it's from, I imagine, from the agent's perspective, they're selling not only just a book, but they're kind of selling a person, right? Because it's like your story. It's not necessarily just a story like a fiction book is. And I think maybe that's part of it. At least that resonated with me recently with a conversation I had recently with someone who's also writing a memoir book, and going, I could see it from the agent's perspective, from a business standpoint, going like, oh, I can like dig into this and like, how can we tell this in a compelling way that can really, showcase this person too.
Yeah, and as an author brand, if you're writing memoir, you would you would really be doing yourself a favor to set yourself up to write a half a dozen memoirs. In other words, don't have a book that's a full arc of your life, but is really just like a slice of life, and know that you can write 5 or 6 more. I think David Sedaris, I mean, you don't have to be funny, but they really want to buy you as somebody that they can continue to work with for years. And I think too many people try to sell their life story, and that just like, what can they do with that? Even if it's one good story, they can't, there's nothing more beyond that.
That's a really good point. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, Sarah, I guess let's close it out with your question.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious about so sort of following up on my thing before, which is that I have trouble completing things. I was wondering what your perspective was on working with a developmental editor, because that's another thing I've been considering is like, oh my God, I just need to get this thing done. And it's,
Yeah, it depends on where you are, and here I am, I'm part of the June cohort here in Foster, and that's sort of why I joined.
Oh, cool.
Just to keep going. And it seems to me like we can be each other's developmental editors in this series. What I would more recommend would be get a whole first draft done before you go there, unless you're just like completely perplexed about what to do next. And if you're perplexed, I would get a book coach and not a developmental editor. So finish a full draft, and instead of full on hiring a developmental editor, which could cost a few $1,000s, ask for an editorial letter. And what that is that they will read at your manuscript, they'll read 3 or 4 chapters really closely, and they will give you a letter describing the big picture things that you need to change. Then I would do another round of edits, and then I would hire the editor, if you feel that is needed. But developmental editors are really expensive, and if you've got it here in Foster. You've got the community you need.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the book coach, because that's like, to me recently I was like, oh wait, what's a developmental editor? And then I'm also like, oh wait, what's a book coach? And I think a lot, obviously we're all in Foster for this reason, is like to help us along, but it's like, how?
Yeah, well, a book coach, as opposed to a book coach, just saying like a best book coach should have publishing experience and they should be a talented editor. I would say like that's the main qualification. But if you say your problem is not finishing, then a book coach is somebody who will make sure that you do. You make this commitment and you show up and you promise to do pages, and then every 2 weeks or so you get on the phone and you say, this is what I've done, this is what I'm struggling with. And they'll say, go you, and read what you need to be read. The other, also just having a writing group. Most writers who are, or taking classes, like if you are writing memoir, there are always great workshops that you can take, like Catapult. I find like those kind of situations are really great for moving a project forward really fast with feedback. And usually they're taught by either a published writer or somebody who's an editor. So you get very quick feedback that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Great session. Julie, thank you so much for being here. It still blows my mind that we have people of your caliber in the community. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else you would want to get out? Anything you think we didn't cover?
Let me know. Tell me what you want to know, because I want to answer these questions. I mean, this is like, I really want to write a very prickly book about publishing for authors. I mean, it would be my goal. I would love, like, anyone who becomes a self-published author and gets good at it should not be keeping that goodness to themselves, and they should become an independent publisher, in my opinion. If you learn how to do that, then you should be publishing other people too.
I have a question, Julie.
Yeah.
Have you read Steph Smith's book, Doing Content Right? Because I think the one thing, and sorry, Art, I'm just kind of jumping in, because I think people from Silicon Valley come about this from a completely different mindset, right? Like the traditional publishing world is all like, I'm going to get to be this amazing, beautiful writer, and then someone will notice me and publish me. Whereas Silicon Valley is like, no, fuck it, I'm publishing, you can't stop me.
Right.
And I think, as your conversation has pointed out, like the money is still in the traditional publishing world, right? Like
they want you. They want you.
They want us, but it's like we're not sure how to get there. And I think Art, for example, like your question before, like because you're coming from more of a Silicon Valley venture capital perspective and company building perspective, like there's such a broad chasm still between those worlds. And that's what I see the most, is that the secret sauce that I'm looking for is, I'm like, Steph Smith wrote this amazing book, so you should read the book. I'll send it to you. I have a PDF, but it's very much about doing it all on your own but I think it ignores some really specific realities, which is that unless you're Steph Smith and you're this like machine person, you're not going to sell anywhere near as much as if you had actually sold a book. I'm not saying Steph's book is not great. It's totally great. It really is. But it's like, there's still so many like grades between Steph's book, which is awesome, and like somewhere like your, like a traditional publishing, how to do it, which is also great. Like somewhere we're in the middle still.
Well, I want to cover all models. I love self-publishing too. And I think, I don't think it really matters how you publish it. It's just like, and that's the thing, it's like the audience building mindset. I mean, there's a major problem with the publishing business model in that books are so cheap that and quite expensive to develop that you need to sell a shit ton of them to make a lot of money. So there's got to be another way to produce and sell content, and the track record on book publishing startups, even since the internet, has been pretty bad. I mean, no one's really broken through yet, which is interesting with a book publishing startup. Tapas is an interesting one. I don't know if you know, it's like this platform for comics, and Radish is interesting. Those two companies just got sold for serial fiction, but they aren't publishing books. So, I'm really interested. I'm not an advocate. I just know that I'm from traditional publishing, and they want you, and they want good writers, and then they treat writers like crap. And then, and then it's really hard to make money if you're just like one person chirping in the cage.
It seems like we have a solid brain trust in this group with a lot of questions, a lot of answers, and I guess probably the best location to push this forward is the Slack channel. You mentioned it previously, right? There's a
there's a book publishing, and I'm part of that channel. So if you have questions there, definitely I'd be happy to. You can email me. I'm Julie at julieink.com, and my website is 82 Stories. And I do produce books. I'm not gonna do any sales pitches, but I do that.
Awesome. Julie, thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone else also for joining in. Amazing questions. And yeah, let's take it to Slack and see what we can get done there.
All right. Thank you so much for letting me rant for an hour.
That's awesome.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.